Now my loom's all warped up, so if I turn it over on the back, it looks like this. We've got these little pieces all going around the backs of the pegs. So I've come up to the last slot up the top here, and if I just turn that over, cut off the tail and sticky tape that as we did before. Okay, we'll turn it back over. Now you remember those pieces that we cut, the separators, 2 cardboard separators? I'm going to put one down the bottom and one up the top. So to start with, we're just going to weave it in, going under the first thread and over the next, under the next one, over the next one. It's fine for you to pick these up with your fingers to start with. So just over, under, all the way across. So after inserting that, we can just push it gently down to the bottom, and this is going to be our starting point for weaving. Now we're ready to start weaving, so it's good to choose a contrasting yarn if possible to your warp, and if you're younger, a thicker yarn will be more helpful to you because it weaves up faster. So to start with, just grab a length of yarn that's about as long as your arm and cut that. And we're going to take some sticky tape and stick that on the end of our stick, our ice cream stick. Now if you are a little bit older, you might find it easier to use one of those plastic tapestry needles. They're quite big, but for younger people this is a bit easier. And we'll stick that to the loom. I'm sticking it on this side because I'm right-handed, so when I turn it over, I'm all ready to start on the right side. So if you're left-handed, you might want to stick it to the other side. And from this point, we can just start weaving. So the first row, I'm going to go over the edge and then under the next one, over, under. So I have to pick them up initially. But as you go along, the threads will be easier to manage. Over, under. Keep going right across to the other side, and then we'll talk about. So that's my first row, or what we call in the weaving world my first pick. Then we take our fork, and it's easier if you take the back of the fork and gently press that down, which is called beating. So once we've got that beaten down, we can start back the other direction. Now you can see at this end, I've come over the end warp thread. That means to turn back, I'm going to go under it, because if I try and go over it again, it's going to pull out this row of weaving that I've just done. So I'm going to go over that one under the next. I'm going to do the same thing, alternating under, over, all the way back, across to the other side. I'm across to the other side now, and I just want to show you something before I pull this through. Before I pull each row through, I put a finger or a thumb on the edge of this warp here. Then when I pull it, I know that it's not going to draw in too much. Okay, and I leave a bit of a curve on it as well. If I pull it in really tight, then these edge threads are going to end up pulling right in. It's better to leave it a little bit loose at the edges, and then you'll get a wider piece of weaving in the end. And you can pull on that to tighten it a little more at that end if it needs it. So that's our first 2 rows. I'm going to do one more row in this colour, and then I'm going to change colours. So now to change colours, I'm going to cut that off, and then to finish that off we just want to weave that piece in. Under a few warp threads, and then we can cut it. Then it's secured in there. Now I've got my next yarn threaded up in the tapestry needle so that I can show you what the tapestry needle looks like. And I'm going to start actually weaving back. I'll count in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 threads. And I'm going to weave in those threads to the end of that piece, about there. We can cut that off in a minute, and then I can start weaving normally like I was before, just to secure those tail ends in the work. Just pull that bit through, and then we can cut off that end piece there and carry on weaving. Once you're comfortable with the back and forth weaving, you might want to try something that makes the weaving a little bit faster. So I've come to the right hand side, and my next row is to go over this warp thread and under the next. So instead of going with the needle, I've got these 2 ice cream sticks that I've stuck together, and I'm going to use them to pick up these threads all the way across. So then you can just keep that in your work, and when you come to weaving from the right hand side, which is where you put it in from, you can actually stand it up on edge, and it holds all of those threads up for you, so that instead of going over under for that row, you can just go across and this part's easier with the ice cream stick. And once you've come across, you can lay that flat again and slide it up there out of the way. Beat in that row. And for your next row, you're going to go back to over under. But when you get back to the other side, you're doing the right hand side through again, you can use your sticks to hold up the threads for you. And this is where I've progressed to, and I just wanted to mention a couple of things. The first is, remember the other piece of cardboard that we cut out at the beginning? That's our guide for the top, for where to finish weaving, so that we've got enough warp left to be able to finish it off and take it off the loom if you want to do that. So that should sit up where your threads begin at the top. Okay, up there as a guide. You can actually insert that into the threads if you want to, but it's not really necessary at this point. It's just a guide to go, okay, I've got about that much weaving left. The other thing I wanted to mention is yarns, and I forgot to mention this before, but if you don't have any yarn at home, you can get yarn very cheaply at an op shop, which is what we call them in Australia. If you're in another country, if you're in the US, you might call it the dollar store or the Goodwill or something like that. Here we call them op shop, which is short for opportunity shop, but often they have bags of wool and you might get a few balls of wool for $1 or something like that. So it's a really good place to pick up cheap yarn. And the other thing is I'm using some hand spun here, and because it's a bumpy, uneven sort of yarn, I'm starting to get waves in my weaving, which I really like. So if you want to achieve a similar effect, you might consider using some sort of bumpy yarn. So I've woven almost as far as I can now. I've got a little bit of space left, but I'm going to finish off there. And now I'm going to show you a few finishing techniques, because if I just cut these pieces here now, all these warp threads would just slip through and the weaving would unravel. So you can leave your weaving on the loom if you want to and just hang it up as a wall piece like that. That looks beautiful. But if you want to actually use the piece and maybe use it as a doll's blanket or make a different kind of a wall hanging or whatever you want to do with it, a coaster, you can do that by taking it off the loom. So we'll start by pulling out this separator that we had in the bottom. That reveals all that space we've got for those warp threads there, and we've got a plan for those. So the first method I'm going to show you is hem stitching. I'm going to actually, this is my top side here, but I'm going to flip it upside down, and I'm just going to come in with the needle a few threads in this direction. And bring that out to there. Leave a tail. So you need for this probably a length, at least a length of yarn, at least 5 times the width of this weaving. And you need a tapestry needle. Now if you are a younger person doing this, you can either ask an older person to help you with this part, or you can wait and do the next way of finishing, which is a bit more simple for a younger person. So for the hem stitching, I have my thread in there, just in there. It's just sitting there, so I'm going to put my thumb on that to make sure that doesn't come off. And I want to come, that's running under there, so I want to go over that and up into my weaving by probably 2 threads. And my strand here at the bottom is very thick, so I'm only going to go up 1 strand. I'm coming up through those 2 warp threads, and I'm going to pull that through. Okay, then I'm going to let that fall down there, and I'm going to go under these 3 warp threads and up where my thread tail is, like so. Then I'm going to pull that tight. You see how that makes a little knot? Now I'm going to go down, right next to there, there's a gap. Okay, so those 3 are knotted together. And we're going to go under 2 warp threads again and come out above this first one. And pull that through. Let the thread fall down. Go under the 2 that you had there, and let it go over that warp thread, over that thread that you've got there, and pull it. Okay. Now that little tail there, I can just let that go. I don't have to worry about that now because it's all secure anyway. Alright, next one, under 2 warp threads. So there's 1, 2, come out through that one. So really I'm counting 2 warp threads that way and 1 weft thread that way. If you have a thinner weft thread, you might want to count up 2 weft threads. Pull that through, let it fall, and then go under those 2 that you went under, and over the other thread that's falling off there. That's the other part of your thread, and then pull that up and pull it tight. That makes really secure ends. So if you can do this method, it's preferred. It'll keep the weaving nice and tight. Okay, up, let the thread fall down, go under the 2 that you just went around, and pull. Pull tight. And get a bit quicker at this as you go along. Then when you get to the end of your hem stitching, so stitch that whole row along there, you can just work this thread back into the work. Across a few warp threads, and then simply cut it off. Another way you might want to consider finishing, especially if this is going to be a wall hanging and you want something to hang it by, is you can come up the top. Now if you're going to use this loom again, this is probably not a very good option, but if you're not too worried or you're not going to use it again, you can bend these parts forward and gently ease off the threads so that they come off in loops. So if you can see there, I end up with looped threads instead of cut threads. And just pull them off one by one. Ease them off. Some are harder to get off than others. So now I've got actual loops at the top that I can then, if I'm going to use a stick or whatever I'm going to use, a piece of dowel or whatever it is, I can thread them through and hang them by that. Now at the bottom we're still attached, so what we can do at the bottom is, because we haven't hem stitched, we need to secure these ends. So we can cut, oops, we can cut these threads off, cut them as close to the bottom as you can. So that's free of the loom now. I'm going to start at this tail end because that's where it's most likely to unravel, and I'm going to take the two closest warp threads to the edge and I'm going to knot them together. In a double knot, and lay those two threads aside. Now I grab the next two, that actually knots around the bottom of your weft thread, of the first weft thread. Okay, lay that aside and take the next two, and so on all the way across.